Sir Tyrweld waved his sword towards his flank. After several revolutions, his signal was picked up. The soldiers cheered as they watched their trebuchets hurl sharpened debris at the dwarves ahead of them. With famed accuracy, the Bretonnian engineers dropped payloads one after the other squarely into the middle of Oldor's legionaries. This was done from far beyond the range of guns, and the cannons could make no reply on account of the rolling dunes that blocked flat trajectories. There was little heavy armor could do against a ton of falling rock. It was the first tense moment the legionaries had faced. Always, though, there is a mechanical solution. Engineer Kazran steered the scout gyrocopter carefully around a bank of cliffs, just west of the burgeoning battlefield. The Bretonnians were making such a fuss over their hits that the noise of the copter's approach was successfully obscured. It rose into view to come at the army's flank at speed. Kazran trained his gaze on the flailing wooden arms of the trebuchet battery. He grabbed a short handle beside his rudder levers and began to turn it in quick bursts. The clattergun on the gyrocopter's nose spat out burning chunks of Kazran's own design, bullets stuffed with a chemical fuel which burned brightly from the heat of the firing charge and flashed down into the wooden struts of the trebuchets. Where the wood wasn't shattered by the impact, fires smouldered with a menacing blood-red smoke. Only one trebuchet was fired in this condition, causing it to splinter and spiral about at great injury to the crowds below. Carefully controlling the effects the recoiling clattergun had on his flight path, Kazran laced his way through the forest of siege engines and saw them all in pieces or flames in short order. The bitter Bretonnians reasoned that they were done using them anyway. The banners fluttered and tilted southwards in response to relayed drum riffs. The 5,000 infantry pushed forward. The trebuchet crews took up longbows and rang the sides of the gyrocopter with remarkably swift shooting. Kazran dodged with wide swings, firing off the odd poorly aimed volley in response. A hatch in the plate behind his head slipped open. "No more of this fancy stuff. We've breakfast to keep down," a moistened beard complained. "Fair point. Cheaper to shape a new hull than to clean up your mess," Kazran nodded. "Let's have you out and about then." Kazran slipped behind a dune and deposited his cargo of thunderers, expert shooters. They would see what work they could do to the rear, while the true battle began far to the front. Thousands of Bretonnian warriors, clad in flowing red gambesons, streaked with blue paint and brilliant chivalric coats, made their way into the grumbling, growling maw of Oldor's legion. As before, there was a great deal of shooting, punching down the humans all along the line. Still, with so many men-at-arms, most arrived at the legion's shield line. The fighting here was more bloody than seen in the previous clashes. These Knights of Origo were better drilled than Thagan's lot, and even had a few actual knights to direct the nitty-gritty of the killing up close. A few legionnaires were bested with blades through their armor joins, or had their helmets snatched off by grasping hands amid the crush. It was a fierce scrum, unbearably loud as the muskets and rifles of the dwarves right behind the shields sounded off endlessly. The sight of the men at the front being torn apart by these weapons rather put off the thousands waiting behind. And for those whose turn came to pry open the shield wall, how could they focus on their task when their mind was screaming for them to take note of where the nearby guns were pointing? Ever distracted, it wasn't uncommon for short curls of an axe to dice their legs. Grateful they should be, for it was a mercy to crawl away in agony below the sightlines of the guns. There came a point at which the Bretonnian host was trying to move away, but their masters bid them back again and again. This resulted in a deadly floundering, unable to decide which way to go as hissing shot kicked up the sand all about. Ultimately, all order and oaths were spent. 3,000 lay dead across the field, Sir Tyrweld among them. He had pride of place, being furthest forward of the 24 corpses that were behind the legion's shield wall. The Dawi had seen 100 killed or wounded, not an insignificant part of their number. Oldor was more concerned that the black powder had almost run out amid the fighting. Had those 2,000 who fled returned the same day, the result would have been quite different. Fortunately for the Dawi expedition, no such will to fight remained in Fyrus. Oldor accepted their surrender the following day, and Fyrus joined Al-Haik in Oldor's little empire, having their gold carted off to the Atalan Mountains. Even before the first caravan had been arranged for this, news came that the humans were out in force along the proposed route. A host had been spotted approaching the mouth of the mountain valley, but as ever had turned away. Still, word was they remained at large in the nearby deserts. Oldor's grudge had been settled, he reckoned. However, he did not dare set ink to the book while his charge remained in much related peril. The defeated humans on Fyrus Island were passed over to a few trusted natives of Atalan, and Oldor took his Dawi on a hunt for the Umgi still at large. They were not hard to track. Even without a gyrocopter to peer over the horizon, the litter of footprints and cart tracks a marching army left in the baked dirt was enough to take Oldor to unseen dunes east of Atalan's mouth. As the mountains faded from view to the west, a blur of colourful pickets could be made out in the east. Getting closer revealed a fortified oasis, protected by an incomplete palisade. Tall flag masts had been added to bear the brilliant red and yellow banners of the Bretonnian Errantry. Evidently completing the palisade had not been a priority, with word of the action of dwarven cannons spreading about. Oldor had his men assemble for battle near this fort, assuming his presence would be attended to in the usual Bretonnian fashion. He waited half a day and a night, with no movement from the fort. The next morning, though, there was a faint trumpeting, too distant to be from the fort. Oldor took Story and 50 yellow-coated scouts to venture around the fort's perimeter. On the rear side, they saw humans rushing out along a lightly weathered track towards an oncoming army. Moving to lie atop a small dune and equipping his telescope, Oldor tracked his gaze along a shining column of troops. "Battle-weary. Carts of their wounded follow behind," he reported. "Unless I'm very much mistaken, we haven't fought them yet," Story noted. "That means... You remember I told you why these desert towns were forsaken? On account of their former guildsmen coming back to stake a claim. Yes, so hastily they often forget to dress. Skeletons about, I suspect. And I suspect these Umgi put them back in the ground for a while. A shorter while every time, but we'll have the day at the very least. We'll be done by then. They're speeding up. You'd best be back. Leave the gunners with me. We'll cut their tail, and perhaps avoid any major quarrel." Receiving news of a loitering formation of sun-baked dwarves, the Bretonnian troops came through the fort, marching double time. Oldor made sure to be out in front of his troops when the humans arrived, after a rugged sprint of the sort only a dwarf with a gale of responsibilities at his back can make. Leading these humans was a woman carrying a banner almost as tall as those fixed to the fort, billowing its yellow flower on a field of red. Horses decorated in a similar fashion were close at her sides, ridden by plain-looking knights who barely registered in comparison. Around them marched the usual massed errant infantry. The leading woman sheathed her banner in the sands and raised a wide-bladed sword. Her host let out what cheers they had left after a long day. "She's as good as doing our ranging for us with that banner," Kazran said. "I reckon our boys can hit her square in that empty face with the first volley." "Not while the Thane's still at work. We'll get these lot without powder wasted," Oldor said. "Being a lord's made you mighty frugal. Used to be you'd start shooting just for fun." "If we shoot them, we can't shoot something worse. Long as Grungi wills our powder only burn once." "Oh, now that is a nice way of putting it. Luckily the lads appreciate poetry. I'll pass it on. You off then?" "Aye." Oldor went out on his own to negotiate, unfazed by the sheer weight of the force blooming before him. The woman trotted past her banner to meet him as he drew close. "Mountain Duff, you have committed grave offences against Our Lady's honour. Has the darkness of your tunnels sapped your light away at long last? She asked with rehearsed eloquence. Her troops seemed to enjoy it. Merely a difference of opinion that arose concerning our property. Aye, out of hand it is now, Oldor said calmly. You will not admit to be servants of the darkness. You mistake us entirely, good lady. I take it you are the one they call the Damsel of War, Paladin Reponse. I am Duchess Reponse de Lyonesse. Reponse was quick to correct him, with accompanying jeers from behind. Forgive me, Duchess. Long have we toiled without news of wider things. You see, we seek to bring salvation to our kind in the days to come. No such thing permits you to slay honorable knights. Never said I had permission. Just swords leveled at our necks, despite our misfortune. You want my pity, dark dwarf? I want you to prepare for the end times, my lady. You're not doing very well, then. Aye, true enough. We might both be doing better by evening's end, though. All this action has been for the sake of mistreatment after our expedition ran afoul. As for our goal, we're securing our holds in the mountains against the coming of chaos. Chaos warriors are here? Nay, not yet, thankfully. You've not had news from your homeland. Speak it now, dwarf. Oldor relayed the various rumours of chaotic goings-on that had brought about this whole mania for an escape. Rumblings from the far north. Plagues of vampirism, beast morphia, and madness of every category. The voices that even a dwarf might hear if they set their heart attuned to darkness. Voices of the Chaos Gods, whose power stretches the veil between their realm and the mortal plane, breaking thread after thread every moment they remain unchecked. There was no paladin of Bretonnia who didn't fear these things. The knights errant, long adrift in a land where time functioned by its own scheme, were truly not aware of the portents of the end times. We fight to cleanse the realm of dark influence. Beasts and monsters are only the beginning, Reponse said. This holy banner protects us from the voices of the fallen gods. If what you say is true, it may be part of their plan that it would silence them to us, so that we would be blind to them until they have bloody blades to do their work. Well said. I'd wager a hefty clutch that you're right. And I'd go further, and say that both of our companies here might be better off going back to our homes and getting on with the work of surviving this madness. Then why did you come here? To tell you that. I've said my piece. Although there is one more point to consider, if you still have fight left in you. At this, Oldor pointed towards the fort. While the day's light was fading, it was obvious that the banners were being quickly lowered. A few dwarves waved from around the palisade, and pointed at groups of people and carts being gathered in the many gaps. Story had kept the scouts hidden in the sands on the other side of the fort, before springing an ambush on the train of wounded and valuables Reponse had sped away from. The people of the fort, mostly the rugged natives of Araby by the looks of their dress, sat around dejected in the face of dwarven rifles and fresh news of those kin killed in Reponce's recent battles. Reponse viewed this scene, then quickly turned back to Oldor, her face a picture of disappointment. We'll trade all you want back to you, Oldor said, seeing no harm done. The evening's battle was avoided after an exchange of captured soldiers for any good metal worth smelting that the army had. Reponse, her force mostly deprived of their weapons by said trade, took her survivors and sacred banners away into the cool night. She gave Oldor no farewell, deeming this a gesture of rudeness well deserved. Oldor, again, did not notice the snub. As for the fort, it was revealed to contain an ancient town by the name of Bel Aliad. The local Arabians had been in a long isolation, speaking little of Old World tongue. Still, Story managed to communicate to them that they should bring their wares to market in the carracks from now on, which promised good products of local mines and orchards. While the Bretonnians' purpose had been to add Bel Aliad to their empire, instead they had shown Oldor a nice spot to add to his. After scraping through to a peaceful resolution in his war, Oldor soon began his return home. The Bretonnians did the same. word came that their far-stretching dockyards on Araby's western coast had been emptied of ships, ferrying the knights errant back to their ailing lands in the distant north. Not all had left. Remnants treated with Oldor to secure a connection to his Kingdom of Carrax and the safety that might entail. It entailed little. You see, Oldor's march, as successful as it might have been in terms of field-testing weapons and securing revenues for his projects, had opened the gates of Araby wide. Araby was one of the many points at which the servants of chaos found the magical currents of the world to their liking. As such, the jungles of the western coast were dens of the ancient beastmen, chaotic monsters corrupted to value war alone. Where forests gave way to marshes or arid flats, the fungal orcs matured from the mud and banded together in simple-minded raiding parties. Hardly better than the beastmen. And of course, in the times now upon the world, the stirring of ancient magic slid lids from once sealed tombs and animated the bones of long-buried Arabian soldiers to serve their old masters once again. The Bretonnians, through their purifying magic and constant hunts, had kept the ever-bubbling rise of monsters at bay. With the death and departure of their leading warriors, this was no longer the case, and the bubbling grew ever stronger, day by day, as the prophesied time crept upon the present. Oldor had created across Araby a mix as potent as black powder. As he proudly marched his troops back into the Atalan Valley, the fuse was already lit.